Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone. Today is July 13th, 2013, and this is your host, Stephen Novella. Joining me this week are Richard Saunders.
Hello.
Bob Novella.
Hey, everybody.
Jay Novella.
Hey, guys.
And Chris Brown.
Well, hello again, everyone.
No, you haven't picked the wrong podcast, folks. This is the Skeptic Zone, after all. And I'm with my good friends here from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Wow, we're all here at the end of this huge hallway outside the ballroom where the convention's going on, the amazing meeting. How many TAMs is this for you now, Steve?
I think this is 6, right? We started with the 5th one, and this is the 11th one.
This is 11, right. I think.
Yeah, so 6.
7 then.
Oh, then 7.
7.
Yeah, I can add.
Wow.
Including TAM Australia?
8.
That would make 8 if you include TAM Australia.
Wow,
yeah,
that's fantastic. And your table is about 6 or 7 tables down the hall from here. A busy table, I bet.
Yeah, we love coming to these conventions and talking to our listeners, and there's pretty steady stream past the table. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's good. And you've got the power bands this time, the SGU power bands. You're wearing one, Bob.
Yes, this is my favorite color, black. Of course, I love it. I love seeing Skeptic's Guide to the Universe on this band. Although one of my problems with these bands is that I'm afraid people will see it and think it's a real power balance band, and if I don't talk to them and explain to them, they're going to think I'm supporting this crap. But oh well.
And I'm sad to say that after running through space and time, evil Captain Jay Novella has caught me.
Captain Saunders.
Good to see you, Jay. Good to see Courtney here too.
Yeah, we wanted to bring the baby, but we didn't. So he's home. We can't wait to go home tomorrow and see him.
Yeah, I bet that's right. Well, folks, coming up on this week's show, not too much to do with the amazing meeting. That'll be coming up in the weeks to come. But we have an extended interview with Dr Eugenie C from the National Centre for Science Education, a favourite of everybody, I think. She's a wonderful lady.
Excellent.
Lady.
It's sad to hear that she's retiring, but
yes, how about that?
I guess you can't keep going forever.
No.
But she's done an amazing job at the NCSE, and now we're just waiting to see who can possibly fill her shoes at that organization. It's hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine.
She's so perfect for that role.
Well, we'll do that. We'll start that interview rolling, and while that's happening, I'm going to run down to the end of the hall. I'm going to grab a large coffee and a Vegemite bagel, and I'll let you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Gross.
I'm delighted, absolutely delighted to be back here once again at the National Centre for Science Education with my good friend Dr Eugenie C. Hello, Jeannie.
Hello, Richard. So good to have you back.
Thank you. I should have been here a few days ago, but I was sort of having a bit of a rough time with a rotten bug I picked up, but I'm feeling much better.
Well, if you start hacking and wheezing, we'll forgive you.
Thank you.
We'll blame it on our West Coast viruses that you... Not that you're such a hothouse flower from Australia, but you have not experienced such things. Yeah. But, we have different viruses than you do, so you get cut a little slack.
Now, isn't that interesting? It's this is an interesting segue into evolution, isn't it, Eugenie? Because
everything is a segue into evolution. You cannot escape.
Imagine if there was only one cold virus or something like that. It would have been knocked on the head years ago. I mean, you'd get it once, and your body would build up the immunity. Then you could sail through the rest of your life quite happily. But no, alas.
And that poor little virus would have to keep looking for other creatures to infect in order to reproduce itself. So.
Yeah.
Well, from a virus's standpoint, you obviously do want to have those mutations taking place to shift around its genome a bit. So.
They must mutate incredibly quickly.
They do. Yeah. That's the nature of viruses.
This is another thing we've never discussed, and it's sort of just,
What? Real science?
Yeah, no, I mean, the evolution of viruses.
What are we, skeptics or something?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've gone about as deep into the evolution of viruses as I understand. I do know that there is such a huge number of versions of the cold virus. I mean, but one of the things that is really interesting about viral diseases like colds and mumps and things like that is it's very, very likely that Neanderthals never suffered from them.
Really?
Yeah, because in order to really get a virus going in terms of transmissibility from one host to another, you have to have a pretty good-sized population. And until, frankly, the agricultural revolution, humans just did not live in big enough communities to keep a virus going.
Never thought about that.
Yeah. Well, anthropologists think about this kind of stuff all the time, so glad you came by. So it really is fascinating,
You wouldn't see a Neanderthal with a runny nose, maybe?
Well, probably not. I mean, only if another Neanderthal smacked him in it or something, but that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah.
No Neanderthal would have suffered, my friend Richard, as you have these last few days. Wheezing and hacking away. Because now bacterial diseases are different. But viral diseases, as I understand it, really do require a pretty good-sized host reservoir in order to maintain themselves.
Well, and what better host reservoir than the human race at the moment, especially with intercontinental travel and all the rest of it.
Oh, we can swap around viruses like in nothing flat. I mean, that's actually one of the staples of science fiction.
It is, isn't it? It is, yeah. Epidemic and virus and all that. Yes,
and on up and everything.
Yeah.
Right? Did you ever read a book? Now, we might actually talk about something substantial at some point. But speaking of fiction that deals with apocalyptic viruses wiping us out, did you ever read an old book written in the 50s called Earth Abides?
I can't say that I have, no.
For any of your listeners who are looking for kind of a real pioneering science fiction book of this genre of the majority of the species gets wiped out in a very short period of time, and you have small groups of people living in the physical plant, shall we say, of humanity. The cities are there. It's just people who died, basically. Earth Abides was written by a geographer, and of course, now I can't remember his first name. Last name is Stewart. George Stewart, something like that. Written in the 50s, and he was actually a geography professor at UC Berkeley. And he wrote this book about what happens if you take away most of the humans on the planet, but you leave the sort of the physical plant of civilization, and you leave, plants and animals pretty much as they are. What happens over time? And as a geographer, he really does integrate a lot of science into it. One of the things that happens, according to his reading of natural history, is that bright red flowers that human beings have selected for are ornamental flowers. There tends to be a disproportionate number of bright reds. They tend to be much less common. And I forget exactly what the reason for that is. Probably has to do with pollination and what kinds of things pollinating insects see more easily than others. It's been a long time. I think I better go back and reread Earth Abides because I'm enjoying thinking about it. And what happens to dogs when people are no longer really maintaining the specialized breeds that we have?
You can imagine what would happen to dogs. Yeah.
Well, after a couple of generations, you kind of get back to your basic yellow dog,
probably,
as we refer to them in the South. What I've sometimes jokingly called, I love dogs, and when I retire, I'm going to get a dog. I don't know what my husband.
I don't know what your cat's going to say about it.
Well, yeah, but my cat's not going to be too happy. Neither is my husband. We got to work this out. But I am dog deprived. I really need a dog. But the dogs that you find in the archaeological record, the first domesticated dogs, that you find in any kind of number, are in the Middle East around 3,000-4,000 years ago, Natufian culture, archaeologically speaking. These dogs were sort of medium-sized. They were very generic. They did not look especially wolfish like you find huskies and Dogs like German Shepherds, they didn't have the bizarre features like the achondroplastic legs like you find on dachshunds, or the squashed faces that you find in some of the pugs and these other animals. We obviously don't know what kind of coats they had, long or short, but they did have curly tails, which is something that shows up fairly early in domesticated dogs and also in domesticated foxes. Some of those studies that were done. It's one of these canid traits that doesn't occur much in the wild, but which human beings, when they see, they kind of like, so they select for it. But probably, getting back to Stewart's Earth Abides, probably dogs would sort of go back to that kind of basic Natufian, middle-sized, no special characteristics, just your basic four-on-the-floor canid. And cats, on the other hand, do just fine. No problem with them surviving. They do just fine. But it's a great book. It really is. Very interesting. Sheep's days are numbered. Sheep don't really do very well without human beings to kind of help them.
Not in the large numbers that we have them on the planet, because that's purely for human intervention.
And besides, they aren't exactly selected anymore for their wit.
No.
They're pretty dumb.
No, they're pretty dumb.
Goats, on the other hand, are much more adaptable. So he sort of goes through all of the different, domesticated animals. Sweet corn, forget it. It is such a fragile plant in the sense that we have selected maize or sweet corn to be this highly starchy but impossible to reproduce on its own type of plant. There's just all sorts of reasons why corn in its little husks and everything just isn't set up to reproduce itself. So people basically go back to hunting and gathering in this book, which is kind of a plot line that you find in a lot of these post-apocalyptic books.
I guess you'd have to.
Depends on the size of the population. But there's a huge, in this story, I think it was a virus that spread very quickly, and only a small number of people in Earth Abides were naturally resistant to the virus. And oddly enough, people who had been bitten by a rattlesnake, who just, happened to produce antibodies that were close enough to the natural antibodies that some people had, that they were able to fight off this particular
People who've
virus.
been bitten by a rattlesnake. That's got to be a very small number of people.
Yes, exactly. So most people die in this great epidemic.
Wow.
But anyway, it's a fun book. It's worth. It shouldn't be confined to the scrap heap of science fiction history. It should be revived at regular intervals because it's well done.
It sounds like it would make a great movie, but of course this sort of movie has been
Seems to be a lot of movies like this.
A lot. Well, it's a good story.
It's a great
story. Yeah,
it's a great
sure.
what if.
And I'm surprised just looking around this room. This is a new room you have here at the National Centre for Science Education. This is your new conference media office, I guess you'd say. It's a lovely big room. It's well lit with bookshelves and skulls everywhere.
Fossils. We always have our collection of fossils. We've got mostly fossil. Well, almost entirely fossil humans. Occasionally we have the rare primate, and of course we have orangs and gorillas and a chimp. And hither and yon as well.
T-Rex, is it?
What's a conference room without a dinosaur?
There
right?
it is.
Yeah, heck, there you go.
Easy to spot.
We remodeled a chunk of our archives into a conference room when we added the 2 new climate change staff members, and I'm afraid our small office is just, with our open cubicle framework, it was just too noisy. We needed a place where people could have conference calls, have media interviews, do the occasional podcast.
Yes.
And one of the things that we're hoping to get is to get some appropriate lights and reflectors, so that we can actually do some filming in here as well. Oh,
it would be great because of the backdrop of all these bookshelves with skulls and books.
Well, we look so scholarly with all of our stuff. Yeah. nothing like a wood background here. But you can't really do good film unless you have the proper lighting.
That's true. And I know that very well. Yes, indeed.
We have some promo pieces on our YouTube site that every time I see, I kind of cringe because everybody looks so awful.
No, really.
Well, in the sense that the light's hitting the faces wrong, and you end up, even if you don't have bags under your eyes, that's what you end up looking like because the light's coming in at the wrong angle and whatever. So hopefully we'll be able to get somebody to donate some lights. If you're listening, we have some listed on Amazon wish list, or we'll get a grant and get some appropriate lights and maybe do some more YouTube stuff. I'm looking forward to that.
That would be good. YouTube stuff is always pretty important, I think. Now, Eugenie, it's not that long ago I was here interviewing you about the fact that you've taken on this whole new area of climate change. When was that?
We got our first funding for the Climate Change Initiative in the summer of 2011. And in the fall of 2011, Mark McCaffrey came on and we started preparing to launch, so to speak. And in, I think it was January of 2012, we announced the Climate Change Initiative. And so it's been about a year and a half.
Okay,
and
yeah.
We got a little additional funding from an anonymous donor, which was very gratefully received. And we were able to hire our second climate change person, Minda Berbecco, who is a biologist, does ecology things. And so now we have a good, strong staff, and we're starting some really very interesting projects that I think will help a lot in terms of getting the science of climate change into the schools, helping teachers to deal with the pushback that they get, not just from evolution, but also from climate change.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, why we took this topic on.
Yeah.
Because, we were running into the same kinds of problems.
Well, I can see the similarities, and even when I'm back in Australia listening to comment or reading the newspapers or whatever it is, so much of the time we'll have these outspoken people who are like the creationists running around saying that this is all a scare, it's all a conspiracy, who frankly don't know what they're talking about. Now, I must admit, when it comes to even more than a shallow look at something like climate change, I don't know what I'm talking about. So it's amazing other people think that they're suddenly experts and the consensus of the scientific opinion is wrong,
Yeah, it's funny. What we learned in dealing with evolution for so many decades is that it's really not about the science. It's about the motivation that people have for accepting or rejecting certain authorities. Now, you and I know, probably a lot of the people listening to this show know, that the consensus view of the vast, vast majority of scientists all over the world, not just in the United States, is that living things have common ancestors. The universe is very old. The planet is very old, billions of years. And evolution, in other words, has taken place.
Yeah.
And the vast percentage of scientists, particularly those who do research in climate science, are in agreement that the planet is definitely getting warmer. The rate of change has increased precipitously in the last 50 years, and that human activity, especially in the release of warming gases, has a great deal to do, especially with the rate of change that's taking place now. And this is something that really is not being debated among scientists. But if you have certain ideological beliefs, in the case of evolution, special creation is the major ideological belief that's, keeps people from accepting the science. You're going to look at the creation science experts, right? The people who
agree with you, huh? In other words.
Exactly. Yeah. And they present arguments that sound scientific. They may be based in science. The arguments of creation science proponents have been examined by mainstream scientists, have been shown over and over and over to be false and to be not supported by evidence and should not be accepted. But there is this tendency to accept these views because they don't contradict the ideological position that conservative Christians hold. Now, in the case of climate science, the pattern is the same, the details are different.
Uh-huh.
there are ideological reasons for rejecting anthropogenic climate change. In the United States, these are political ideological views or economic ideological views, views that American independence or security are being threatened. Individual freedoms are being threatened if these people who claim anthropogenic climate change is correct are correct. That we'll have to, we can't drive our big cars. We all have to turn to Priuses and change our light bulbs, and we're risking the security of our country because we're not using fossil fuels for the army or whatever. These feelings really are very, very strong.
Yeah.
Or there's a feeling from an economic ideological standpoint, often expressed by libertarians, that anthropogenic climate change is really an attack upon the capitalist system, and that constraints should not be placed upon the industries that produce carbon, the coal and gas and oil industries. No constraints should be placed upon them because that is socialistic instead of being capitalistic, and the free market will solve all problems. I mean, there are these ideological views that really do shape what science you're going to pay attention to. So when somebody who has that kind of ideology hears from a climate science denier that here's the science that shows that the planet either is not getting warmer, which is harder and harder to support because the evidence is so strong, but minimally that it's not people's fault. If the planet is getting warmer, it's
part
not
of
us.
some natural cycle, right?
Unstoppable solar cycles is a very famous video.
Or of course, we've heard the one, it's not in fact getting warmer, we're just about due for an ice age. I hear that quite a bit.
Well, they're not paying it. Or my favorite, which is that 1998 was the hottest year in the last 50 years, so therefore it's not getting warmer. And of course, that's just, that is the most egregious cherry picking of data you can possibly choose.
No. The most egregious is when we have a cold day in Sydney and they say, all these people who say the world's getting hotter, it's freezing outside,
Well, was it 2009, whatever, when there was thigh-high snow in Washington, D.C.? See?
Yeah.
What do you mean global warming?
Yeah.
Sweetie, you're confusing weather with climate. They're not the same. There's this great little clip on YouTube that was made by some Swedes. I sometimes use it in my talks. And it's this great little illustration of the difference between weather and climate. And what you're seeing is this guy, this little cartoon figure of a man walking a dog on a leash. And he's sort of plodding along, and he's sort of walking, diagonally across the screen that you are observing him, this little cartoon figure. And the dog is doing the dog thing. The dog is running to the left and to the right, and he's going up and down and zipping back and forth on the leash. Meanwhile, the guy holding the leash, the owner of the dog, is just plodding in a straight line.
Yeah.
And then the camera, so to speak, on this little vignette pulls back, and you see that the dog is well, I should say, properly speaking, the man is walking in a diagonal line, so to speak, across an XY axis graph. The dog is crossing the line up and down as he's on his leash. The dog is the climate. The dog is the weather which goes up and down. But the climate is really controlling where that dog is going, so to speak. Yeah. And so it's this very lovely little.
I like that.
I'll send you a link to it, and
I'll include it on the show notes for this episode. That sounds like a really excellent thing. Do you remember what it's called? Man and dog, climate and weather. You probably find it that way.
But I'm pretty sure it's the Swedes who did it. The guy who. I have it on my computer, and I can tell you exactly where it is on my wallpaper, but I can't tell you the name of it.
I'll let the listeners know before this show is out. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, it's great fun.
The wonders of post-editing interviews.
It's just marvelous.
We can fit all this sort of stuff.
Fix it in post.
Fix it in post, as they say.
As they said at the creation.
So, it's interesting that you can use this wealth of information, especially when it comes to the arguments, both things, really, and what you've learned from the creationism evolution story.
I think, well, the reason we took on this whole new subject area, as you say, this is not a subject area that you or I are intimately acquainted with.
That's right, yeah.
To some degree, what we have done is said, okay, we're going to take a look at the consensus of the scientific community, of people who have done the hard work of figuring out how the world works in this particular context. And, we're going to look at the outcome of what we know is this very iterative process of progress and critique and progress and critique. And once there is a consensus, and we're going to go along with that consensus, even though we are not researchers in this field.
Yeah.
And I can have confidence in that process because I am very familiar with how that process operated when it comes to evolution. And when I was actually a real, genuine scientist, as opposed to playing one on television, I was contributing to that process. I mean, I know how science works, and I know how it came out in the case of evolution. Living things have common ancestors. Cope. This is it. And I see the same sort of consensus having arrived at within the climate science community as well. So it really is not just accepting the dogma, shall we say, of science. It's actually understanding how science works and accepting a consensus view, which might change.
Yeah, and
that's okay.
This is very hard for a lot of people to cope with, to grasp, especially a lot of the people I deal with in the New Age supernatural paranormal realms, shall I say, psychics and clairvoyants and this sort of ilk, who will gladly use scientific sounding words and phrases, but this concept of the scientific consensus, that's what you support because people who research it, this is their conclusion. But you also are prepared to come and go with the tide, as it were, as things change. And to a lot of people, that's beyond the pale. And another interesting point is a lot of people will hang on to their beliefs and they'll follow XYZ person who says this because I guess at times they're seen as the maverick. Mm-hmm. Here's the one guy who's standing up against the, they laughed at Galileo. I hear that so many times I want to pull my hair out,
They laughed at Bozo the Clown.
They laughed at Bozo the Clown, as Carl Sagan said. Yes, that's right.
Right. Yeah, being laughed at is hardly grounds for accepting somebody's point of view, really.
But it's a wonderful thing for them to use because they say, well, he was right, therefore this person who they're laughing at must be right. And that's how the thinking process goes.
And it's wired into the culture, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we share basically sort of Western industrial culture in the Australia and the U.S. in English speaking. And it's kind of wired into our culture.
It really is.
We really like underdogs.
Yeah.
We really like the mavericks. We really like the high noon guy who's standing out from the crowd and going his own way and stuff. Sometimes when I talk about science as a way of knowing, I'll express it in a way that I hope gets across the idea that some aspects of science are very stable and don't change, like we were talking about. Other aspects of science are more labile, and they do change, and those are the parts that we're good with. If you think, it's useful to think of science as a set of concentric circles.
Yes, this is a good model, yes.
Yeah. In the middle is the core ideas of science.
Yeah.
The next concentric circle around that are the frontier ideas of science, and then on the concentric circle around that is the fringe, which is the part where we like to splash and play, right?
Yes.
With our paranormal and all the other kind of fun stuff, especially that you do. But the core ideas of science are not likely to change. The big idea that living things have common ancestors, the basic idea of biological evolution, not going to change. The big idea of continental drift, that the planets move around and the surface of the planet has changed over time, that's not going to change.
Yeah.
In the frontier, the next concentric circle out, the frontier ideas of science, that's where the research is going on, that's where discoveries are being made, and that's where things very likely will change and can change or be modified. But the nice thing about science is that very rarely does everything change. I used to just want to smack my physical anthropology colleagues upside the head when one of them would start a talk, or worse yet, a class. Everything in my field has changed since last semester. No, it hasn't. Oh, really? You mean females don't have wider sciatic natches than men? Who knew? Well, I don't mean that. Well, of course not. Most of the stuff doesn't change.
Yeah.
And we change the details. And sometimes we change very tiny details. But the core ideas don't change.
Yeah.
And a lot of those frontier ideas will go into the core, and some frontier ideas are going to be dropped because they don't work. But that the planet is getting warm is an observation, really. It's not even a core idea. This is just a flat-out observation. This is an observation is a fact.
Yeah.
How we explain that warming, the idea that there are certain gases that, because of their chemistry, because of the physics involved, act to warm the planet. Things like CO2, things like methane, the important warming gases which are caught in our atmosphere and which are helping to insulate the planet and make it toastier. Those are basic core ideas. And so our explanations for the current warming of this planet, which is an observation, are core ideas, which is why there is this very strong consensus about anthropogenic global warming.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what you're going to be taking on next, Jeannie.
Retirement.
Retirement? Never. Surely
Did you hear?
not.
Truly?
No. Truly.
No. Yeah. I have announced my retirement by the end of the year.
One. Good grief.
Oh, Well, let me tell you right here and now.
Wow. I'm shocked.
Well, the time has come.
Good heavens.
The time has come. NCSE is at this very exciting time in its evolution, shall we say, in its trajectory, its ontogeny, if you will. We've got this wonderful new exciting program. The climate change program is starting. We've grown so much from when we just started out, and it was just me, right? We've gone from 1 to 15 in only 26 years. But it's time for new ideas. It really is. It's time for somebody new to come in and really take this organization in new and creative directions. It is the nature of nonprofits to thrive when you have new blood coming in, and it's time.
Wow. And what do you think? You'll have more time to do the same sort of stuff, or you're going to be doing different stuff?
I won't be waking up at night worrying about money. So
well, that will be nice.
That'll be real nice. And see, I'll get that dog that I was talking about.
You'll get that dog, but I don't suppose this is going to mean an end to things like lecturing and visiting.
Actually, I have speaking engagements lined up through, I think, next May.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I'd be surprised if that would happen.
Yeah, nobody's actually called up and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we want to cancel. You're no longer the director."
Yeah.
I'll still be good for a few more months, I suspect. I won't have forgotten everything I know by.
Now you're just about to go to the Grand Canyon again.
I am.
That's very exciting.
See, now what I wanted to do is on the description of the. We have advertised for a new executive director, and the board is in the process of reviewing resumes that have been submitted, and we'll be making decisions about who to interview and so forth in the very near future. But I wanted to build into the job description, must hate unreasonably hot weather and cold water. Well, because that's what the Grand Canyon trip is.
I see. Of course, yes.
But I don't think that's going to happen. That's one of the real great perks of this job, you see, is being able to go to Grand Canyon every year. It's a fabulous experience. So we will be. We in fact have our dates for next year already. We have booked our very favorite outfitter, Moki Mac, to go down Grand Canyon again. So any of your listeners who want to go take our creation and evolution tour of Grand Canyon, which you really must do someday.
Oh, one day, Judy.
You really have to. It'd be such fun. And I will I can't guarantee that I will be hosting this trip in years in the future, unless, of course, we get that ideal candidate who hates water. But I might just be tagging along. It's, the thing about the canyon, it gets in your blood, and it's such a fabulous place. I'm very excited about.
Have you been on
that
that new thing I saw on television where you can walk out over the Grand Canyon, or is that a different place?
That is on one of the side canyons, actually.
Right,
it's on the one of the Indian reservations there. And no, I haven't. You can see it from we sail past it.
Oh, really?
Raft.
Okay. Yeah.
If you look up, you can see the particular canyon, and there's the little.
It's like a horseshoe comes out. The glass footwalk.
Right. You can't be vertigious to to take that, but it's. I'm probably too cheap to do it. I think it's $25 or something, and I can look down in the canyon without actually having to stand there.
I guess so. Wow.
And besides, the fun part is looking up.
Looking up.
Well, from the river view. I mean, people go to Grand Canyon, and of course, you go to the edge and you look over, and there's this "oh my God" kind of moment as you appreciate the vastness and the beauty and the sweep and the spectacle of this fabulous feature. But it's very different being on the river and looking up. You get a totally different perspective of the canyon. The majesty and the sweep and the feeling of age is there, but you experience it differently.
Wow.
And it's just, even if you've looked at Grand Canyon from the top, I would encourage everyone to look at it from the bottom up as well. It's a pretty extraordinary experience.
Now, just something's just occurred to me. Something I caught up with a little while ago on YouTube, in fact. It was a show called Conspiracy Theory Road Trip. Have you seen that?
Yes, and they did a show on Grand Canyon.
Yes.
Which they actually had asked me to do that, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it because I feel very strongly about not debating creationists.
Right, okay.
And this is television.
It is television.
So what they're going to do is let's you and him fight.
Yeah, they did that to an extent. Yeah.
It's the conflict narrative that they like to present. And what I suggested to them, that what might be a very interesting program. I'm sorry, your listeners aren't familiar with what this show is. What they did is they got some conservative Christian students who were all young Earth creationists, and they took them on a tour in
a bus.
Yeah.
In a bus,
And they went to various places.
They did, and spoke to various scientists and people, yeah.
And then I think the climax was going to Grand Canyon, where, was it Don Prothero? Was that the one who did it?
Oh,
who was it? I'm trying to remember. They got a very competent scientist to take them through.
I can't quite remember.
I kind of think it was Don. Whoever it was did a very good job. I think it was Don. But, of course it was, here is the science. And, if you have your fingers in your ears, you're not going to be listening, right? And so none of these kids ever really quite absorbed the fact that their allegedly scientific views just don't match up to the data. I mean, the data clearly refute their view. And it's only if you ignore huge amounts of data and just cherry pick the ones that superficially look like they support your view that you can hold attitudes like the Grand Canyon having been formed after Noah's flood. I mean, catastrophic production of the layers and then the cutting of the canyon itself. And what I had suggested to the filmmakers before they filmed it was it would be much more interesting to get some Christian scientists, some scientists who were also Christians but who accepted evolution, so that the students wouldn't be able to go into the familiar default. Oh well, he feels this way because he's an atheist.
Right.
Yeah, because that is their ultimate defense.
Yes.
Whereas if you had, I gave him some suggestions of some scientists who would be, good at that, at explaining why the science refuted creation science, but who also would kind of have that extra component of not being dismissible because they come from the same faith tradition as the students. I mean, you'd have to get evangelical scientists, but I gave them some names.
Really?
But at any rate, they decided to do it the way they did it. So there you have it. But it's an interesting program because these conservative Christian kids were very likable, and they were, they were kids, and so they're searching for meaning in life, and you kind of. You can't help but be sympathetic to them.
Do you get requested often by documentaries and TV companies?
Yeah. It's not every. I mean, there's only so many that are done. When there's some sort of a public event like the Dover trial.
Yes.
That kind of generated a flurry of little documentary-oid types of things.
Right.
We're actually fairly careful. We'll advise anybody.
Yes.
And try to steer them right, so to speak, so that they. I mean, it has to be an entertaining show. It's television, right?
Of course.
We understand that.
I understand that very well.
I get
it.
Okay.
Yes.
It's not a science lecture. It's got to be something fun. It's got to be something grabby. But if you can do that but still not distort the science, I consider it a victory. And that's what we try to do. We while appreciating the importance of being entertaining, we try to steer them in ways that would make this do. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt if you teach people a little bit of science on the side.
Of course not.
Even if your goal is to entertain.
You were on Penn and Teller's Bullshit.
I was.
You were. I remember.
Many years ago.
Yes, it's a while now, isn't it? Isn't that surprising?
Years and years ago. Yeah, it's forever ago. Yeah.
But in one respect, it just seems like the other day this show came out, and I thought, oh wow, what's this? But yes, it's years ago now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's scary.
Is it still on? I don't think
really
so.
I don't think they've done a new episode for a long time.
So. Yeah,
they did quite a number of series, but they have. But yes, I'd have to rewatch it now. Isn't that scary?
Well, I remember they we helped quite a bit in the background on that.
Yeah.
And this was, I'm pretty sure, the first season.
I'm pretty sure you're right.
Yeah. Because when we were called by the producers and they said they couldn't tell me who it was or who the hosts were. This was all very secret because it hadn't been released yet. This was all very hush-hush.
Yeah.
And then, we gave them advice of who to interview on the creationist side and, where to find people and who to interview on the evolution side. And we kind of helped them structure the show. And then I got... They did go down to the Institute for Creation Research and they interviewed Gish and Morris and, the usual crowd down there. I think it was probably John Morris. And they sent me the script, and or maybe it was before they interviewed. It was before they interviewed, and they wanted me to review the script to see if they were going to be asking the right questions, which is exactly what we want people to do, because we can help them.
Yeah.
We can help them ask better questions, so it's a better show.
Yeah.
And at the very top, it said Penn and Teller, and I thought, how about that? Penn and Teller must be doing a TV show, but that's all I knew about it.
Yeah.
They didn't have the name of the show or anything like that.
Wow.
I knew it was something to do with Penn and Teller. That should be fun. But of course, the people who, the people who interviewed me were not Penn and Teller. They just sort of cut in Penn and Teller.
Penn's voice.
The usual stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was fun. It was fun working with those guys. And what's really fun is when they listen to you. Because we really can help them make a better show.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, that's the advice, of course. Whether you're here or not, Jeannie, the National Centre for Science Education is here to help and advise, not only teachers especially, but also you're a resource for the media.
Absolutely, and we will continue to do that. When I announced that I was retiring, which was, I think, in May, actually, there was a fair amount of breastfeeding. So, oh no, what a terrible thing. How can and the thing that people have to remember is that NCSE has never been just Eugenie Scott. It's always been a very hardworking and very competent staff. And now it's better than ever. And yes, I've helped to shape it, but the staff has always been what has made NCSE successful. There's no way that one person could have done all that we've accomplished over the last couple decades. Almost 3 decades, but who's counting? So, people have to remember that. NCSE is going to be just fine without me. We'll get a new director who will be creative and energetic and probably better at raising money than I am. and this, he or she will do just fine. And frankly, if it doesn't, then I will have failed. Because what my goal is for 3 or 4 years from now, some new staff member shows up at NCSE and says, "Jeannie who?"
An unusual goal. Jeannie
that is
Scott.
my goal.
Well, when years to come, when I come knocking on the door, it will be sad not to come back to your office and sit down and have a cup of coffee. And
yeah, but you know where I live.
I do. I've got your number, Jeannie Scott.
And I have made. You're coming over for dinner.
I
tonight,
am. Yeah.
And I got up early this morning and I went out to my backyard and I picked lemons from my Meyer lemon tree and I made you a lemon meringue pie. It's going to be tasty.
There you are, folks. There's perks to this job, I tell you. Jeannie Scott, thank you very much.
I'm so glad to see you again, my friend.
Hello, Skeptopoddies. Dr Willis here from RiAus with some highlights of the news in science for this past week. And as always, news from the world of science has come thick and fast. A Swedish study has found that children with high proportions of polyunsaturated fatty acids in cord blood at birth are more likely to develop respiratory and skin allergies in their early teens. The fatty acids in question were omega-3 and omega-6, but the mechanism by which these lipids might affect allergy development remains unknown. Other researchers in this area urge care when interpreting this study and have expressed scepticism about its methodology. A study in The Lancet has found that prolonged exposure to particulate air pollution increases the risk of lung cancer even at levels below European Union limits. This is one of the largest studies of its kind and includes data from Australia. The study also showed that short-term exposure to most major air pollutants appears to increase the risk of being hospitalised for, and dying from, heart failure. Australia's chief scientist, Professor Ian Chubb, has identified antibiotic resistance as an important scientific issue for the Australian public. He says it has the potential to become one of the world's biggest public health challenges. A new paper released by the Office of the Chief Scientist this week says that urgent action must be taken to address the rising threat of antibiotic resistance. Good bacteria from poo may help an inflamed tummy. An article published in Nature this week identified a combination of 17 human-derived Clostridia strains that reduced the severity of allergic and inflammatory conditions in the guts of mice. It suggested that these strains may be useful candidates for the future development of oral bacterial or probiotic therapeutics to treat human inflammatory disorders. And finally this week, does a child's bedtime affect their brain power? A UK study found that going to bed at different times every night throughout early childhood seems to curb a child's brain power. They looked at over 11,000 7-year-olds and found that those with irregular bedtimes at age 3 had lower scores in reading, maths and spatial awareness. This applied to both boys and girls, suggesting that around the age of 3 could be a sensitive period for cognitive development. More information on these and other science news stories, including the original papers where possible, can be found on the RiAus website, riaus.org.au. And to wrap up this week's bulletin, some recent science history. Did you realise that it's been 1 year since the announcement of the discovery of the Higgs boson? What have we learnt in the last 365 days, you may well ask? And what's so important about a Higgs boson anyway? Find out more in a guest blog on the RiAus website. That's riaus.org.au. That's it from me for this week, and remember, it's our obligation not to believe in the unbelievable.
Hi, I'm Finn. And I'm Rebecca. And we're the Skepticons. Skepticons is an Irish podcast by the Dublin Skeptic Society. It takes a conversational, irreverent look at science, news and skeptical topics from an Irish perspective. You can find us at www.theskepticons.com.
You're always spirit with your strong finance.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Well, I'm still here at the end of this massive hallway at the amazing meeting. There's a session in progress right now, so it's a little bit quiet out here, but soon I'm sure there'll be hordes of people walking past the Australian Skeptics table. Now, before I go this week, something to look out for, to go to, and there'll be a link in the on the webpage, the show notes for this episode. The ABC science show Catalyst in Australia in the last week ran a program very critical indeed of chiropractic, and it was quite a report, quite an interesting report. If you look at the show notes for this week, or if you Google Catalyst ABC television, or if you know the website, you'll certainly find it. And I can sincerely recommend you invest half an hour and watch that report. It's not geo-locked, so you can see that online video all around the world. So that's Catalyst program from ABC Television in Australia and their special report on chiropractic. Well, coming up over the next few weeks, I hope to bring you lots of interesting insights and interviews from the amazing meeting here in Las Vegas. But until then, I better put this recording equipment away and set up my table with the copies of the Skeptic magazine and talk to people for the rest of the day. And until next week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from the amazing meeting in Las Vegas.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.